Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I've also set up on my second device. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in with me today. Greetings. We are going to start very soon with the session on weighing in debates. This session is especially important for me in my mind because I feel like this is an important aspect of debating that a lot of times goes unnoticed in a manner that a lot of people don't actually engage with weighing in the appropriate manner. They don't really know how they are supposed to go ahead and weigh particular arguments or go ahead and assess particular arguments within a debate room. But at the same time, I think weighing in debates is a good learning experience for both debaters and adjudicators because it allows both of these participants within debate community to go ahead and have a glimpse at how exactly are they supposed to assess particular arguments that come up in a debate, be it from the standpoint of how they're supposed to weigh out an argument from the opposition, or be it from the stance of how they're supposed to weigh out an argument to go ahead and understand which team deserves to take the win or which team should be ranked above which in a particular tournament or a particular round. So I think that is an important consideration that we go ahead and take into consideration in this particular meeting. The first thing that we'll start by discussing is what is weighing and why is it crucial in the first place. So I think simply said, weighing is the process of comparing importance of different arguments or impacts presented within a particular debate. I think it is about explaining to a particular judge why you think that your arguments should be prioritized over your opponent's arguments, or like going ahead and explaining to them why you feel like your arguments have a greater impact or a greater priority to be taken into consideration over the arguments that your opposition is able to bring forward onto the table. It is not just stating your arguments are good. Essentially, weighing requires you to go ahead and prove why they are better or more significant as an argument with context to this particular round. Now, some of you might have gone through with the previous workshop that I took about burden fulfillment. I think in that workshop we were able to explain on a clearer degree what are things that people should be trying to go ahead and cover as relevant context for a particular round. What weighing does is goes ahead and allows you the capacity to process the comparison of whether each of the teams have been able to do a proper job in terms of burden fulfillment and explain why one argument or a series of arguments that one side of the team is putting forward is something that is significantly better or most important within the context for the round, within the context that the debate requires you to go ahead and discuss about, within the context that requires you to go ahead and engage with the crux of the debate in the round. So, simply said, weighing is the process of comparing the importance of said particular arguments or impacts that are essentially presented within a particular debate round. Why is it crucial then? I think debates are rarely a particular setup where you have a single right answer. This is very clearly mentioned when you understand what burden fulfillment looks like, what sort of characterizations are generally necessary to go ahead and support your burdens, what sort of stances you want to put forward in a debate. The reason why all of these aspects are necessary is because you understand that there is no one burden that is right for a debate. There is no one stance that you can take within a particular burden. There is no one analysis that fits better for a particular burden, which means to say that all of these creates infinite number of permutations and combinations of things that you can go ahead and engage with to create the debate case that you're going to go ahead and present in a room. That automatically means that there is not going to be a single right answer in terms of what proposition or opposition could have done, or any side, be it a BPD debate as well, could have done in a particular round that is going to fall under the category of a single right answer. It means both sides usually have valid points, valid arguments, and that also intrinsically means that judges now need a framework to decide which set of arguments are more persuasive, to decide which set of arguments that are more creditable than the other, and to hence come to a conclusion as to which side was better able to cater to the debate or cater to the crux of the debate, or better able to fulfill the burden of the debate or burden of their particular side, or most importantly, were better able to fulfill the nuances of an argument's requirement, the sort of argument that they had intrinsically run in the room. All of these things come forward through weighing. Weighing is essentially this particular framework that judges are supposed to use and then go ahead and come into a decision about which particular teams or team should take what ranking in a particular room. Weighing is something that generally also becomes paramount important in a BP debate, because I think the clearer you understand weighings, the easier it is for you to consistently go forward and come to proper calls within a BP room, where you're able to go ahead and justify said rankings as well in front of teams, and hence are able to give a good oral adjudication that allows you to get a good judge score as well from the teams, that allows you to contribute back to the learning curve of the teams as well. So generally the way weighing works is that it tells judges how to evaluate a particular clash point. Effective weighing can turn a close debate into a clear win. And this is where it becomes not so judge perspective discussion, but so much so a debater perspective discussion. Because weighing is something that is not necessarily expected to happen on the judge's side of the paradigm. It is also something that clearly falls within the ambit of the debate and is something that is allowed of teams to perform. It is allowed of all the roles that we have to perform, and it is allowed that teams, regardless of the speaker roles that individuals carry within particular teams, can go ahead and engage with weighing. Which means to say that weighing is not something that is like exclusively mentioned that whip speakers should be able to engage with weighing or something like that. I think it is allowed unanimously and unequivocally through most of the debate speaker roles, though there is a prominence of seeing weighing in the whip speeches, because by the time whips come up in the debate, it's natural that most cases are coming to a close, which means whips provide the final clarity, whips provide the final conclusions to the cases that they get from their side, and also then are able to draw a comparative with the cases that they have from the other side of the paradigm. And I think the moment that whips try to do that, they are essentially going to engage with weighing of arguments, each and every argument that comes from each side, to try and justify why they think that their side has a better argumentative case or is better able to fulfill the burdens of the debate, etc., through the weighing mechanism that they have. It means the whips are able to clearly tell judges how to evaluate the clash. And this is something that is not just limited or restricted to the role of a whip. This is something that comes into play even from the role of, let us say, other seekers like prime minister, deputy prime minister, leader of opposition, deputy leader of opposition. At any point in case, you can provide a weighing if you're able to extend on an argument that you get from the other side, and you are able to bring to the table an argument on a similar frame from your side as well. So without weighing, you leave it to the judge to decide what is important, which is often enough something that should not be done. As I always keep telling you, judges are humans, judges can make mistakes, and most importantly, judges should not ideally be your friends. They should not ideally be individuals who are looking out for you, who would intuitively get it, what you are saying, who would get the vibe of what you are saying. You are essentially expected to go ahead and provide them with a performance and a certain amount of clarity that makes it easier for them to make these certain decisions in the first place, which is the reason why effective weighing can actually turn a close debate into a very clear win. Moving forward, then, to understanding when to weigh in a debate. Weighing is not just for the end, and this is what I was saying about before as well. While summarizing or providing whip speeches have been an important primary role in overall weighing, it should also happen throughout the debate. There is no particular restriction that has been put forward that any speaker is not allowed to go ahead and engage with weighing. And we'll discuss further in this particular session as to why we think that weighing is probably something that is beneficial if it happens at every instance possible or at every instance feasible. Understanding this is going to be a very important impact. So in a lot of formats we have reply speeches, which also can consider weighing as an important aspect of their particular speeches. But even then, we can ensure that there are weighings that happen earlier on throughout the debate as well. Not only that reply speeches and whip speeches need to carry the overall weighing that comes throughout or comes through from within the debate. Let us understand then how can weighing be incorporated into first speaker speeches, or like speeches from prime minister or leader of opposition, etc. So first of all, Prime Minister or leader of opposition, I think this applies to prime ministers more, that they can preemptively weigh with the case, that they can preemptively guess of what they are going to get from opposition, the highlights of the core contributions that they think that opposition will be able to bring forward, or highlight the core contributions that they think are going to be most relevant or most significant throughout the particular round that we have. This means that our cases focus more on vulnerable groups, and we'll show why their welfare should be prioritized. As an example, this is a weighing mechanism where you're able to, number one, quantify the argumentative layer to what aspect of the debate you want to focus on, and number two, explain why that aspect is necessary, hence providing a weighing that your arguments are probably more relevant to the debate because of your correct stakeholder analysis than what you might get from opposition. This is called preemptive weighing. Preemptive means preemption. Preemption happens when you try to go ahead and engage with something that has not already been stated by the opposition team, and you essentially are trying to guess, estimate or put forward a particular bar on what you expect the opposition to come up with in this round to stand relevant for this round, all of which are arguably allowed within a particular debate framework, especially coming from the first speaker role of prime minister. So I think preemptive weighing is something that PMs can do. Leader of opposition necessarily need not do preemptive weighing because they already have a certain amount of context that comes into picture from what they understand from the prime minister's case. So it is very easy for them to go ahead and engage with direct weighing of matter that comes from the prime minister's speech. But most importantly, I think preemptive weighing is something that applies to all speaker roles. You never really know what the speaker after you, coming from the opposition side, is going to go ahead and provide to you within the debate. I think arguably in an Asian parliamentary debate, only the government reply who goes and speaks at the very end is probably unable to do some amount of preemptive weighing because there is nobody to preempt anymore. And at the same time, I think in BPDs, opposition whip is not able to do preemptive weighing. But I think every other speaker still has some amount of liberty to go ahead and try to preemptively weigh arguments that might come in from the speakers that go ahead and succeed them forward in the round in terms of the speech, in terms of timing of speeches. So I think preemptive weighing applies most appropriately or most aptly to prime minister or PM speeches in a debate, but can also be applied across the bench throughout the round down the case, basically. Moving forward, then, to how do we understand what deputy or middle speakers do in terms of weighing? Directly comparing specific arguments or rebuttals in terms of a direct weighing analysis is more likely to happen for deputy speeches or middle speakers, basically. I think what we mean by deputy speeches or middle speakers is the roles of DPM, DLO, or member of government, if it's a BPD, and member of opposition, where a direct comparative or rebuttal based comparative can be established, where examples like they talk about economic costs, but we have shown direct threat to human lives, which is a far graver concern because our our analysis pushes that are easily able to go ahead and weigh arguments that might come from the other. So this example probably assumes that an argument from opposition is in terms of economic costs. That's a pragmatic push, while the argument from proposition has already shown why a threat to human lives exists as a principal push. And this weighing is a weighing analysis which tries to go ahead and evaluate whether a principal push argument is more important to, let us say, the whichever the stakeholder or actor analysis be for this particular debate, and it is more important to these said agents than whatever pragmatics of economic cost that you can provide in a discussion. So I think weighing clashes as they emerge throughout the debate is something that is very beneficial for whichever team does it. This allows you the clarity to go ahead and explain how you have already compared or drawn a symmetry between arguments that have come up from other speakers, from the opposition teams or from other teams, and hence you're able to go ahead and engage with a comparative analysis of why you think that your material stands the ground, especially in front of material that comes in from other speakers, from other speeches. And you are also then able to make the judge understand the push that we have generally from most debate teams, that they deserve to get a win or that they are doing it the right way. So I think the first thing that you should be doing or you should be focusing on is to ensure that you continuously have weighings inside of your debate case, so as to make sure that you stay relevant to the discussion throughout the round, and most importantly to ensure that you also get a clearer understanding of what you're supposed to be doing more or what you're supposed to be engaging with further throughout the round. Moving forward then to whip or summary speakers. Now, this means we are talking about whips and reply speakers for formats like Asian parliamentary, where I think comprehensive weighing is something that becomes an essential. It is more like something that you cannot at this point let go of if you are already a part of your whip speeches have already started, etc., etc. I think it forms an intrinsically important component of the whips or summary speeches that come up in a debate. Why is that so? So I think comprehensive weighing is essential in whip speeches because it provides an overview of major clashes and explain why the balance on either side, or on your side specifically, since we are assuming that the whip is on one side of the paradigm, has a clearer metric of win based on what is the sort of analysis or depth of analysis that is necessary for the round. So I think the way that this works is that you are able to comprehensively provide a judge with analysis or explanations as to why you think that there is going to be an overview of major clashes that you have already covered, or your teammates have already covered inside of the round, and you think are relevant mostly to the case, to the point that you think you deserve a win. For example, the two key areas of disagreements were X and Y. On X, our argument about your argument outweighs their point on the opponent's argument because of its greater magnitude and urgency. So, as you can see here, the way that two arguments have been weighed are in terms of understanding what sort of magnitude and what sort of urgency exists. So, we all know what urgency exactly means in a debate, but for clarity, then, what urgency necessarily means is that you have to go ahead and prove why a particular actionable step is urgent to the point that it creates an immediate impact or an immediate change in the debate, and hence is an important factor that any actor, stakeholder, or any agent, be it whatsoever, considered as an important thing within the discourse, or will go ahead and probably agree to and concede to in a particular debate. So that essentially falls under the category of what urgency mechanisms would look like. So the way that this weighing goes, it number one tries to establish the sense of urgency within the debate in trying to go ahead and say that, look, we have a greater point on urgency, but most importantly, the point puts forward a greater emphasis on magnitude. Now, I think for magnitude, it's simply said that this is an impact analysis. So basically, the way up that happens in this particular round or in this particular room for the speech that we have right now at this point in front of us, it's essentially just going ahead and talking about two things: an impact analysis and an urgency analysis. So this is probably an actor analysis debate which has a lot of actors and stakeholders involved, which necessarily means that the argument that they have put forward, they are now trying to explain why there is a greater chance that the argument from their side has been symmetric or has been cohesive with the actor analysis in place, in terms of explaining why there is an urgency within the actor to take this particular step forward, hence creating the initiative or the actor incentive to go ahead and engage with this particular decision in the first place. Then is also able to prove why there is a tangible amount of impact, which is something that essentially becomes important in this round, as they are able to prove that they have pragmatic benefits over others, which is a very important consideration or a very important clash point as well within debates. Moving forward, then, to essential aspects of discussion, weighing early, weighing often, and weighing comprehensively at the end is something that becomes very important. So, I think often enough, and these are few pointers, often enough, I have seen whip speakers try to go ahead and wrap up the weighing analysis that they can at the very end of their speech. Maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes are remaining, and they try to go ahead and enter into a weighing comparative. They try to go ahead and enter into a paradigm where they are able to compare the worldview from both sides. That is, they go ahead and try to compare what the world building from both sides have looked like, what are the impacts, what are the tangible, let us say, actionable steps that have been taken on either side of the paradigm, what are the feasibility analysis for each of these paradigms. I think the way that you can go ahead and weigh a particular argument in a debate is manifold. And every time that a whip tries to go ahead and engage with it at the very end of their speech, it turns out to be something that is, number one, not done very well, number two, not delivered very smoothly, and number three, not given enough importance on. What it does, it decreases the value of that particular weighing in front of the judges because of the hurried manner with which you have addressed the same. Which means to say that there's also a greater likelihood that you'll not be able to engage with the way up in a manner that is holistic to the point that an adjudicator can buy into it and can go ahead and agree to the fact that yes, you have done weighing right. That is the reason why in whip speeches or in reply speeches, weighing early, giving way ups often enough rather than trying to clarify further, and to go ahead and provide a consistency in weighing and a comprehensive manner of weighing is going to go ahead and help you much more than any other thing. So I think every time that I see a whip provide a whip dump in terms of going ahead and providing newer material into the debate or trying to sneak in newer material, or when they try to go ahead and extensively clarify things at the very end of the debate, I think it goes ahead and serves their purpose in a more negative manner than a positive manner, because you're then able to sow the distrust within the judge panel that your prior speakers might not actually have been charitable and might not have actually done a good job or even a decent job in terms of the analysis that they were supposed to put forward, which is not necessarily a good thing. And at the same time, if you go ahead and engage with comparative weights, with allowing the liberty of whatever exists on the paradigm currently to continue as is, you might have a better chance of hiding the minute fallacies or minute clarifications necessary. And you might have a better chance in explaining why you think that even then, on an even if argument, you have the capacity to make a tangible impact that your opposition probably is not able to. This becomes a more important structure in a debate where a judge is able to comparatively understand that yes, even if the case had issues, even if the case was maybe not very well established, the whip still was able to show certain impacts and weigh out certain analysis that the whip can go ahead and claim as exclusively on their side, rather than go ahead and show why they think that they have a better case that they can run, etc., etc. So this is the first thing that we have to go ahead and engage with. Moving forward, then, on core metrics of weighing that we utilize in a particular debate. The first thing is magnitude or scale. So, in terms of magnitude or scale, or rather, a more familiar term would be impact. In terms of impacts, the way that you go ahead and weigh is to prove how big is your impact. It is generally hard to understand how big a particular impact is, but generally, the way that you associate tangible terms or tangible aspects to impact analysis is by showing, number one, how many people or entities these impacts affect. Maybe it's a particular community that gets affected. Maybe it's a particular systemic issue that gets affected. Maybe that systemic issue is localized or a minor one, or maybe not localized but nationalized, or maybe not even nationalized but probably globalized. And that is an important thing to take into consideration in terms of impact analysis. So I think you can easily prove to us, if you have a stakeholder analysis and if that stakeholder has a bigger scale within the societal construct, then I think it is to opt into big impacts that can fall onto the stakeholder analysis. And hence, it is easy for you to explain why the benefits of whatever arguments you put forward can, if not tangibly, at least in a trickle down manner, reach the lower rungs of the ladder as well, maybe reach to the grassroots levels as well, maybe go ahead and have a wider impact across the population as well. And these are the manners with which you go ahead and engage with impact weighing across magnitude, across scale. For example, their policy might create a minor inconvenience for a small group, whereas our policy addresses a systemic issue affecting millions and preventing widespread suffering. Now, this is a base layer starting point for a particular weighing analysis that comes in on a scale of magnitude that is much greater than the argumentation that is shown here from the opposition side of the argument. The way that this works is you are then able to go ahead and explain why you think that your policy has the capacity to, first of all, address a systemic issue, second of all, has the implementable mechanisms to go ahead and ensure that it is actually able to go ahead and support a solution being meted out to millions, and is actually going to go ahead and have the tangible impact of widespread suffering being removed or being prevented in the first place. So I think the widespread suffering aspect becomes the impact that you're trying to opt into through your policy, and hence you try to explain why your policy has enough points to go ahead and engage with the society in a manner that can make this feasible. Hence, coming to the second part of the weighing analysis metrics that we are going to use, the second part being probability or likelihood, or as a lot of people try to go ahead and say, feasibility analysis. How likely is a particular impact to happen is something that is very important in a debate. In a certain outcome, a probable one or merely a speculative possibility is something that can go ahead and create an argument into maybe a game changing argument within the debate, to maybe an irrelevant one, or to maybe a barely relevant one. Arguments that are highly probable to go ahead and engage with a particular, let us say, scale or magnitude is probably also able to go ahead and outweigh large and improbable impact. For example, if they are painting a particular picture of a catastrophe but highly unlikely scenario, our argument focuses on a demonstrable and highly probable harm that occurs daily under the status quo. So, what is the unique impact that comes in this particular debate? I think the unique impact that comes in this debate is if you are able to explain why, if someone on the other side of the paradigm from the opposition is painting a likelihood of a catastrophe, but you are able to prove why that is unlikely in the first place because of maybe check mechanisms that exist, because of maybe preventive measures that exist either within your policy or your model or the status quo, and then you're able to explain why your arguments focus on something that is more real, more demonstrable, and more probable to exist or happen within the status quo, or in happen in a very regular manner within the status quo, then you have a capacity to prove in a weighing metric the likelihood that you have a better impact than a probable harm that the opposition is pushing for. Now, you can do this by using multiple things. You can use evidence, you can use logical reasonings, you can use different argumentational or analytical pushes to support claims about magnitude and about the probability or likelihood or maybe feasibility of that particular magnitude or impact from coming into the picture in the first place. Now, with that being said, the next frame that we utilize for weighing is time frame or urgency. So I think urgency plays an important role, especially within debates, because urgency is something that is closely tied to actor analysis. If you're able to understand why a particular cause is going to be important for a particular actor, or why a particular cause is something that requires urgent attention, then you are able to utilize the weighing analysis of urgency, and hence able to explain why on an urgency metric you are better able to serve the community than probably your opposition. Or it can be that you are better able to serve the stakeholders that you have, the stakeholder analysis that you might have made than your opposition. So, how does urgency work? Urgency talks about multiple aspects, but some of them are: number one, when will this particular impact that we are talking about occur? Like, how likely is it that it will occur much sooner than later? Is it an immediate crisis or something that is on a long term basis? I think in long term argumentational level, you can go ahead and take out the sense of urgency in a debate. You can go ahead and explain why in opposition's paradigm they try to put for urgency, but it is easy to take a solution that is more long term as it creates a greater benefit, and because the problem does not necessarily pose as much of a threat So I think urgent problems often demand more immediate action. However, long term foundational impacts can also be weighed as more significant if they set a dangerous precedence or have irreversible cumulative effects. And this is the most important thing in a debate. If you're able to establish the urgency of the debate, you are also able to establish the pace with which you want to solve the problem. Often enough, the best approaches to solving problems is not to find a solution that allows for a good short term impact, but is probably not that likely to work out in the long term. And if you are able to prove why you have a long standing argumentational push, and you are able to prove why your analysis or your solution is much more suitable for this particular debate, for the particular motion that you have, in terms of going ahead and being able to solve the particular problem in the first place, then you are much more likely to go ahead and explain why long term foundational impacts are something that have an important way up in this discussion over any sort of urgency and over any sort of short term measures that might have gotten like into the discussion from your opposition teams. So, with that being said, timeframes and urgency can be better understood by this particular example that we have. The example talks about their solution offers a potential long term benefit, but we are dealing with an immediate crisis that requires action now to prevent irreversible harm. The urgency of our impact takes precedence. On the other hand, if you are dealing with an urgent problem, you can also go ahead and utilize this sort of a mechanism to explain why the urgency is so severe that we cannot wait for a long term benefit, because this can go ahead and create further irreversible harms that happen on the paradigm, which means you are now pushing for why a short term impact is probably more likely, but most importantly is also probably more necessary than anything else for this particular debate to exist in. And this is also a very unique type of weighing mechanism that exists for you to take into context before you go ahead and engage with it. Now, let us talk about the last mechanism on the introductory level. The last mechanism that we have is in terms of severity or significance of harm or benefit. What is the nature of impact? This is basically impact analysis. You go ahead and engage with the understanding of whether the impact is a positive or a negative impact. It can be a harm. Generally, negative impacts are talked about as harms analysis. If you're able to prove minor inconveniences or fundamental violations of rights or particular well being, that is basically impacts or harms related to life, liberty, core human dignity, or irreversible damages, are often considered as more severe in terms of going ahead and proving where there is a significance of harm on one side of the paradigm than the other. And they argue for a impact that comes in a discussion that is much more likely to have a tangible net negative than a net positive. And I think this is something that comes in parallel with other things that are there, like, for example, the sense of urgency, the feasibility or likelihood analysis, and the mainframe scale of the particular discussion. So I think if you're able to prove significance of harm, then you're also able to prove why you think that the other side is probably, let us say, not doing a very good job as making a case. So, since we already talked about magnitude and scale, we were talking about in general positive impact. Here, we are focusing more on harms. In terms of harms, then you have an example. They argue of an economic benefit, but this comes at a cost of fundamental human rights. The severity of a rights violation is inherently more significant than a marginal economic gain. And I think this is very important that we are going to discuss with, because I think it was just yesterday that I was discussing a particular motion in another one of the sessions that I was taking. And I think a very strong argumentational push comes into the debate in the manner of actor analysis, because without actor analysis, it was a TSW debate, and we were not able to proceed forward into a discussion without a proper actor analysis. The actor analysis at first seemed like for a lot of the students to be an actor analysis which supports a governmental introduction, which means that they were thinking of introducing state actors as the actors within the debate. And I think, in terms of going ahead and explaining to them why state actors would probably not be the best case actor analysis, the argument that I used was to show why, even if state actors are justifiably able to increase the revenue, they are still going to be much more likely to face a lot of potential harms that come into the picture, especially principal harms that generally are something that, like, state actors would a rather not want to associate with, or B would rather not have the capacity to engage with and solve through in the first place. And I think with that, I was able to preemptively explain to them why, if you are a proposition, you probably should take up a discussion or a debate where you're able to minimize the harms rather than to have harms in the first place. Unless, of course, you have impacts that outweigh these harms in a manner that you can push for it, in a manner that you can go ahead and ensure that an adjudicator actually believes or buys into your argumentational push of the fact that yes, the impacts are probably more important than the harms that we have, which means that you actually go ahead and concede to the harms, and you still are able to prove why there is a tangible impact in the first place. So I think beyond that, then we also have to go forward and understand what advanced weighing concepts and languages are existing within the debate community and how do we generally engage with it. So I think the first core four that we have already spoken about, let us go ahead and revisit them. First of all, being harms, analysis of harms, urgency, a sense of urgency or a metric of urgency. The third one being likelihood or feasibility analysis, and the last one being impact analysis. We also have advanced weighing concepts that go ahead and form a part of the discussion that we are going to have today. So I think the first thing that we have to go ahead and engage with is clarity of link. How clearly does the argument link to the motion and the claimed impact? A strong direct link is more compelling than a tenacious or a multi-step one. Maybe a layered mechanism is necessary for you to link the motion back to the argument that you have. It might not always be the best way. So when you go ahead and have an example like this, our mechanism has a direct and clear link to solving the problem, whereas the proposed solution relies on a series of assumptions that they may not essentially hold true on any side of the paradigm. This is an important thing. If you're able to prove why certain assumptions exist within the case from the opposition side, and if you're able to prove why the likelihood of said assumptions being like important in the first place or being relevant in the first place is relatively low, you are automatically engaging with the debate from opposition at the core, at the crux of the discussion. And I think that becomes an important part of how you go ahead and try to rebut a particular op case. I think often enough people try to engage with opposition cases by trying to directly engage with arguments that come into the picture. But most importantly, so is the capacity for you to go ahead and understand, number one, what sort of assumptions exist within the picture, and number two, what sort of linkage exists within the core argument and the core impact that is going to be derived, and how does it tie back to the motion. This is a very complex thing. Often enough people just run the first argument that comes to their mind. The reason why that can be very problematic is because it allows others to go ahead and engage with this particular impact in a manner that allows them the liberty to prove why you might have assumptions in place. You might not have well thought of the core base for your argument. You might not have established it well within the status quo, or you might not have established it well within the world building comparative that you might have created, or the policy or model that you might have made according to what the motion might have required of you. And this can go ahead and lead to your opposition trying to prove why these said assumptions that you made in the first place essentially not being true in the first place, and hence lead to your arguments or your impacts being downplayed in the debate, even if they might have deserved a greater recognition, or most importantly, even if they might have been more appropriate than you think they were. So I think in terms of a deeper core argumentational push, this becomes an important assertion to make, that you go ahead and first identify what sort of analysis you have and whether they are built on a lot of assumptions or not. And if so, then how can you go ahead and minimize the chances that, number one, your opposition will find out the assumptions, or number two, that your arguments are probably in the best case not based on any assumptions in the first place. That is something that is decided upon through the sort of framing that you're able to extend into the debate. And I think that becomes more important as well. Moving on then into understanding what scope or applicability looks like. So I think, does the application of the argument affect a broader scope or only a specific niche circumstance, is something that becomes a more important construct in a debate. If you're able to prove why your principle applies universally across all contexts relevant to this debate, while their argument is only relevant to a smaller subset of cases, then you're able to prove why there is a likelihood that the principal scope of your scale of arguments is probably much more likely to be impactful in the discussion on a greater scale. So I think that becomes a very important thing to go ahead and consider in a particular debate, because the principle then is able to apply universally across majority of the context. Why is that necessary? I think in general, when you are going ahead and explaining a particular argument, the depth of impact is something that is dependent largely on the broad application of that argument. I think that is a very important factor to go ahead and take into consideration, especially if you're trying to go ahead and create a lot of stakeholder analysis, a lot of actor analysis for the debate to rely upon. Because a broader scope of argumentation means that you can expand your stakeholder and actor analysis in a manner that allows you to go ahead and opt into more tangible impacts and benefits in the discussion, and allows you to then go ahead and prove why you have a stronger case than your opposition. Moving for then the other moral imperatives or principle arguments. I think some arguments can inherently carry a lot of moral weight. You don't necessarily need to establish the moral weight in the first place, which means protecting the vulnerable. The fact that protecting the vulnerable should be an important aspect of the discussion, the fact that protecting the rights of particular civilians being an important aspect, the fact of upholding justice, the fact of preventing atrocities, things that go ahead and de-evaluate, let us say, principles or rights of particular individuals, rights that have been allowed to them by a constitution, rights that have been allowed to them by the human charter. All of these things come into play in this particular discourse. When moral imperatives are established, these become something that we understand as principled arguments. So let us say, even if you're able to prove that a government or a state actor is going to do XYZ, and the opposition team is able to come ahead and explain to you why an inherent moral weight exists as to why the government should not do that in the first place, and explain why doing so in the first place might go ahead and harm the government more, harm the image of the government more, that becomes a more persuasive argument if done right. And that is what moral imperative looks like. The next analysis that we have is in terms of reversibility. Can the harms that are existing right now be undone? Certain harms are irreversible. Death, extinction, severe environmental damage, and other such harms are harms that are irreversible in nature and often weigh in much, much more heavily than other harms that can be reversible in nature. Which means that if you're trying to go ahead and prove harms for the debate, reversibility becomes a very important factor. If you're able to prove that a particular solution has certain irreversible aspects that cannot be taken out of the picture, and if you're able to tie it back to some tangible harms, some precedences that are not right, or some precedences that should not essentially be taken into consideration in the first place as a proper sociable precedence, is something that you can then very easily push as a rebuttal mechanism towards the opposition's case. So what happens then in an argument like this? The economic losses they fear are potentially recoverable, but the loss of life our policy prevents is irreversible, and thus a more critical concern. So if I'm able to prove why in two policies, policy one probably has the capacity to create greater economic loss, but policy two has the capacity to create lesser economic loss but greater loss of life, then even policy one with greater economic loss but a chance at maybe not costing a life is going to be a much more accessible policy to go ahead and enact, because this becomes an easier policy to explain from an actor analysis, preferably from the actor analysis of a government, of an actual state actor, in terms of why there is a capacity that the fear that a potential irrecoverable harm can exist is something that does not exist in the first place in policy one. Albeit the fact that probably policy one has greater economic losses, has probably the lesser likelihood of providing a tangible impact, or has probably the lesser likelihood of being maybe more financially better for the actor than less financially better for the actor than policy two. So I think this is what reversibility essentially looks like. Lastly, then, on efficiency and practicality. Often for solution focused debates, practicality becomes a very important aspect of the discussion, where how essential or how efficient and practical is the solution becomes a very important factor in the debate, because you then go ahead and try to understand what sort of let us say practical mechanisms can be utilized. You try to make your policies more practical in a way that it allows it to be implemented easily, it allows it to be installed very easily into the particular discourse, and hence it creates a greater alternative that your accessibility for the particular solution increases manifold. This leads to you having a greater case, or a greater solvency within the matter, in terms of being the fact that the alternative that exists is maybe one either far reached, or like is something that is not as accessible in the first place to a lot more, let us say, deeper analysis of the stakeholder analysis or maybe the actor analysis. So the way that this works is, if you're able to prove why a practical solution exists rather than an ideal case solution, or maybe a solution that seems to fit better is but not accessible enough to, let us say, the stakeholder analysis or the actor analysis that you have done, then this becomes a case where you are able to weigh practicality over the sort of assumed long term feedback or benefit that you expect to occur, or incur from the other policy that you might be thinking of running in the debate. All of these can be ways that you, number one, self check your cases before you put them out in front of the judge, in front of other teams, and most importantly, can also be, number two, ways or metrics through which you can engage with the opposition's case in a tangible manner to prove why you think that your case is inherently better than what you have from the opposition. Moving on then to comparative analysis. How do weighing in comparative analysis exists? But before we move forward into that, let us talk about a gist of what we have already discussed. Since the start of this particular discussion, we started with an understanding of what weighing looks like. What is essentially weighing? What do we mean by weighing? And then we understand why it is crucial. Where does it occur throughout the debate? Is it something that gets restricted to summary speeches or whip speeches, reply speeches, or is it something that can occur throughout the bench, down the speeches, etc.? And we see that it can actually happen across all speeches. We understand whether we do it preemptively or whether we try to do it in a direct manner, and to where is it more applicable. We also go ahead and understand things how core metrics for weighing in terms of either impacts of magnitude or scale, or in terms of likelihood and feasibility analysis, or in terms of a sense of urgency or time frame, or be it in terms of a significance of harms that might exist on a particular paradigm, can be more impactful and beneficial for you in the debate. More so, we understand some advanced weighing concepts through the utilization of particular languages in terms of understanding what linkage clarity should exist, like going ahead and proving why a particular argument links better to a particular motion, and how does that become, let us say, more important for the discussion than anything else, and whether you are using layered mechanisms or if you have these things based on a particular assumption or not, etc., etc. That being said, we also understand other aspects like applicability or scope, in terms of whether your argument is able to fit a particular discussion and all sorts of stakeholder analysis within that particular discussion, or whether it gets restricted to a particular niche that might not be as impactful in the debate as you might have been talking about. We also understand other aspects of weighing, like moral imperatives set by principled arguments and the way that principal arguments are taken into consideration. We also understand the reversibility or irreversibility of particular arguments, like how you go ahead and engage with irreversible harms, like maybe loss of life, significant loss of resources, maybe extension, maybe severe environmental damages, damages that cannot be reversed in an easier manner without the utilization of multiple actors or without joint cooperation from multiple actors, is something that can be seen as a largely a reversible and irreversible harm in a particular debate. We also talk about other aspects like efficiency and practicality, the way that practical arguments exist in the first place, and the way that it increases accessibility for stakeholders and actors, which means to say that it becomes a better solution set than anything else that others might have been thinking about, or that you might have been thinking about in incorporating into your particular case. So these are metrics that you can use to, number one, make your case analysis better, or most importantly, if not your case analysis, make an argumentational analysis better in terms of why you think that you are doing a better job than your opposition. Beyond that, then now we talk about a comparative analysis of why we think that particular comparatives of weighing mechanisms are more important than others. First of all, we have to go ahead and understand how to weigh in comparative analysis. Weighing is comparative is not enough to say that your argument is big, or like the scope of your argument is big, and just leave it at that. You have to say it's bigger than what. You have to go ahead and quantify it, or you have to go ahead and draw it as a comparative. Without drawing proper comparatives, weighings are never complete. So if you go ahead and assert everything that we have learned till now, it becomes, let us say, not as useful if you're not able to engage with it in a manner that goes ahead and engages. Continuing forward, in comparative analysis, then we also have a further discourse that comes into play. The comparative then exists on even if sentences, even if arguments. What are these even if arguments? Even if arguments concede that even if a particular part of argumentation for strategic purposes exist as viable things that have been stated by the opposition, your argument is still able to win. Even if comparatives in a debate are very important and very impactful. Why is it so? Even if arguments are based on the discussion that even if their policy leads to a certain amount of economic benefit or any particular tangible benefit, this benefit is outweighed by severe social unrest, or benefit is outweighed by either harms or either particular impacts that are negative, or either the fact that this can be a far reaching consequence rather than something that becomes easily accessible. So even if arguments are most probably the more charitable way to engage with the opposition's case, how does that charitability exist? The charitability exists because you are now able to go ahead and concede to the fact that you don't necessarily say the opposition's case is probably completely utterly rubbish, that you're able to say that op probably has a strong case in this debate, and you're able to charitably engage with it in a manner where you say that even if op has an argument that fits well, has a solution that fits well, these are the reasons why there's a likelihood that that argument will not perform as good as ours. And this is what is the first step of a comparative analysis. What are other steps of comparative analysis? Direct comparison using metrics. Our arguments on X are more important than their argument on Y is something that is a direct comparative. It's the simplest way of weighing, it's the simplest way of comparative. We have been talking about it since quite a while now. And the way that this works is in terms of either magnitude or probability or severity of harm or in terms of urgency. More so then into the discussion of what meta debates are and what framing of these particular questions for judges could look like. Telling the judge what the central question of the debate is and how they should prioritize the discussion in a particular manner, or what they should prioritize in a particular discussion about their debate in terms of making their decision about which particular team should get the win or not, is something that is happening in the framing of the question that you put forward to the judge. The way that this works is in terms of this example. Ultimately, this debate comes down to whether you prioritize short term economic gains over long term environmental sustainability. We have shown why the latter is fundamentally more critical. This is the manner with which we are able to explain in a meta debate how you go ahead and coalesce the entire debate that happened into stronger pushes that exist as primary argumentative pushes from either side, and explain what are the trade offs on either side of the paradigm. Now, these trade offs can be explained by telling that these are things that we are getting over these are things that we are losing for the profits that we are generating. The way that this argument does it, it explains to you that this debate comes down to whether you prioritize short term economic gains over long term environmental sustainability, where the trade off is the long term environmental sustainability that gets out of the picture because you are trying to prioritize the benefit of short term economic gains. This is a framing of the question that you can put forward in front of the judge, the framing of the assertion of whether a particular impact is more important for the discourse than the other, and how does it fit well to the debate. Moving forward then to weighing in different speaker roles, let us talk about how different speaker roles have particular weighing analysis that comes into the paradigm. The first thing that comes into the different speaker roles is number one, PM and LO or ground setters in the debate are supposed to go ahead and explain the base framework, are supposed to go ahead and extend the policy, the model, the other framings that might be necessary for the round. And they can go ahead and make these particular discretionary let's say utilizations of weighing frameworks, where number one, they can preemptively talk about the feasibility of an impact coming in, or the feasibility of a particular argument or an assumption coming in. They can probably engage with the same in a manner where they draw comparatives of what sort of solutions can they expect, or they can earlier in a prior manner go ahead and engage with whether particular policies can be implemented in a robust manner or not, or the sort of accessibility issues that can come into picture. These things are allowed to come from the PM speeches. These are also more so allowed to come from like the deputy speeches, the DPM speech, the DLO speech as well, where you have a deeper scope to not do, let us say, weighing in terms of preemption, but weighing in terms of a direct rebuttal, in terms of a direct comparative that you can draw, a direct, even if argument that you can bring forward to go ahead and explain why your argumentational analysis is probably better than what you get from the other sides of the paradigm. This is something that happens in like the deputy speaker world, but more so then in terms of going ahead and engaging with the weighing analysis that we can get from whip speakers. Whip speakers have a principal responsibility to do weighings in the debate. They should go ahead and engage with it in as holistic a manner as possible. This engagement allows them the liberty to prove to the judges why they think, in summarization, their cases have a greater chance at making a tangible change or a tangible impact, and hence are able to push a tangible metric in this debate that allows the particular judge a liberty to engage with an argument in a holistic manner, and hence have the metrics with which they are supposed to assess the debate. This makes sure that you are not relying on the judges further, but rather you're relying on what the judges are essentially able to provide, like as in terms of weighing, and you're also showing the judges the weighing that you're supposed to go ahead and do in the first place. This means then that it clears up your case from as many particular directions as possible to allow for the judge to have a certain amount of clarity towards what you were trying to prove within the number of minutes that you have spoken within your debate. This is basically what we understand as weighing in different speaker roles. Now, moving forward to some common weighing mistakes and how do we avoid them. I think some common weighing mistakes that exist in the paradigm are: number one, just asserting a way up and just leaving it at that. That is a bigger issue, because at every point in time, when we just assert something, especially in a weighing, but don't provide the necessary argumentational analysis needed, the reasoning needed, the way up with the particular argument that comes from op that is needed, we are not necessarily doing a good job, which means that there's a greater likelihood that it will probably just be ignored by the judge, or will probably just not be taken down as a consequential factor in the debate, which costs you important time, precious time of your speech, and it also costs you the chance to go ahead and actually make a difference through your speech. So the first common mistake is to leave way ups as assertions. The second mistake is to leave way ups as vague. You cannot make vague weighings within a debate, and you cannot be vague about the sort of impact that a particular weighing brings to the paradigm in the first place. It means to say you cannot just say that, oh, the weighing is our arguments have a better impact than oppositions, and you leave it at that. That is very vague. That is also borderline an assertion. You have to explain further the reasonings. Now, if you end up explaining why you think that you have better impacts than op without actually stating what these impacts are, you are still providing the reasoning to your assertion, but you're not linking it back to a tangible metric of assessment, which is a bigger problem, which means you now are still vague at the end of the paradigm. Even if you tried your best to explain why you think that your arguments or your impacts are more important, you were actually not able to quote these said impacts in a tangible manner for the judge to consider them as tangible, and is probably still going to be taken in as something that happens in a vague manner. And this is the reason why flag posting, or the third most common mistake that people make, is not going ahead and pointing out things throughout the debate in explaining why down the case, down the bench, they have been consistent with the argument and consistent with the pushes that they have had, consistent with the analysis that they have been trying to explain, and consistent with the way that they are trying to run their case. This point out to, or a subtle nod to, the consistency that you have engaged with throughout the round serves a lot of purposes. First of all, it creates the capacity that even if you were vague, you can still just tie the thing back to something that other speakers might have pointed out to remind the judges that this has been spent an adequate amount of time over, which means that you need not necessarily make it into a very big clarification, and hence you need not necessarily spend a huge amount of time over it. More so, then you are also able to go ahead and engage with the judge in a holistic manner in terms of how you go ahead and push why you think that there's a greater likelihood for you to take away a win from this debate. I think these are some of the common weighing mistakes that happen. These are the ways that you can go ahead and avoid them. And I think with that, the key takeaways that we have from this discussion is in terms of understanding number one, how are weighings crucial? Why are they essentially engaged with in a debate? Why do you necessarily want to have weighings in your particular case? How does that benefit you? How do you go ahead and engage with it in different speaker roles? What are the different policies or different mechanizations with which you can engage with the same, wrapping it up with explaining how you're supposed to present that in front of a judge, what are the common mistakes that generally end up occurring, how to go ahead and engage with these particular mistakes, how to go ahead and make sure that you do not make these mistakes, and most importantly, how to be conscious about the mistakes that you're making and hence have the capacity to create self improvement in the first place. I think with that, we wrap up with the key takeaways that have happened within this discussion. And I want to conclude this debate and this discussion that we are having here with a series of questions, if possible, from the audiences that have been viewing this particular screen, this info slide, or listening to me, and then go ahead and engage with these particular questions, answer them, and conclude the discussion that we have for now. So, are there any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for joining into this particular discussion. It was a great session for me. I hope that you found something beneficial through the discussion. Thank you so much for spending your time here. With that, over to you, Kaushik. Thank you so much.